You've been doing everything they told you. Affirmations, scripting, vision boards, endless techniques stacked on top of more techniques. You've been visualizing the life you want with such intensity that it almost aches. But it hasn't arrived, not fully, not deeply, and somewhere in the quiet corners of your soul, you've started to wonder, what am I missing? Here's the unsettling truth. What if none of those methods ever truly mattered? What if the reason your desires haven't manifested isn't because you're doing it wrong, but because you're being it wrong? This is where it gets uncomfortable. You've been taught that creation is something to chase, to wrestle with, to manifest as if you're conjuring it out of nothing. What if creation is already done? What if your dream life already exists, complete, whole, alive, but you can't access it because you're not aligned with the version of yourself who lives it? You see, manifestation doesn't respond to effort. It responds to state. And state is not something you do. State is something you are. Now pause. Let that land, because that single idea has the power to shatter the way you've viewed reality your entire life. It means the endless pursuit of techniques might be a distraction. It means the real work, the only work, is internal. Not in the sense of more spiritual practices or mental rituals, but in the raw and radical act of becoming. You've been reaching for the thing, but the version of you who already has it isn't reaching. They're living, being, breathing from a different baseline. They exist in a completely different energetic frequency. And until you enter that state, you remain locked out, no matter how desperately you knock. Ask yourself, when you desire something, where are you standing in consciousness? Are you standing in the lack of it, the craving, the hunger? Or are you standing as the one who knows it is already done, who feels it as a lived truth? That subtle difference, it's everything. Because the universe does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you are. But here's the paradox. How do you become someone who already has what you don't yet have? How do you feel fulfilled when the world around you reflects the opposite? How do you live from abundance when your bank account laughs at the idea? How do you trust love is yours when you wake up alone? That's the contradiction that quietly breaks people. That's the invisible wall most never climb, because they're waiting for evidence before they believe. And yet, belief must come before the evidence. State comes first. Reality follows. This is the ancient teaching buried under centuries of confusion. Mystics knew it. Quantum physicists hint at it. Consciousness does not passively observe reality. It creates it. But the language of creation isn't your thoughts, your words, or your wishes. It's the silent vibration of your being. It's the tone you carry when no one's watching. It's the identity you've merged with so deeply that the world has no choice but to conform. And if your inner world contradicts your outer desires, the inner will always win. Not because it's more powerful, but because it's more real to you. So the question is no longer, what do I want? The real question is, who must I become for it to already be done? Because when you step into that state, not visit it, not imagine it, but live from it, the game ends. Manifestation stops being a chase and starts being a mirror, and everything begins to shift without you forcing a thing. But something stands in the way, something silent, something deeply conditioned. It's the hidden program running the show, the one that keeps pulling you back into the identity of lack, effort, and separation. And until you see it, truly see it, you'll keep falling into the loop. You'll keep reaching from the outside, never realizing that the door was always inside. So the real journey begins now, not toward more doing, but toward radical being, toward a revolution of self that flips the entire script you've been living. Are you ready to find out what's really been holding you back? Not on the surface, but at the core of your psyche, your philosophy, your very sense of self? You were never taught to question the root, only the surface. So you chase desires like shadows, wondering why they slip through your fingers, never realizing that the hand reaching for them is shaped by an invisible force, your state of being. And that state, more than anything else, is determined by a psychological mechanism so subtle, so embedded, you rarely notice it. It is the story you tell yourself about who you are. This story was not born from truth. but from conditioning. From the moment you entered the world, layers of identity were placed upon you like veils. Your name, your family, your culture, your trauma, your fears. And each layer came with rules: what you're allowed to have, how far you're allowed to go, what kind of love, power, or success someone like you can expect. Beneath all the self-help jargon and spiritual bypassing lies this one brutal reality: you are manifesting not your desires, but your identity. Carl Jung warned us that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. The you that you think you are is a construct, a carefully curated product of internalized expectations, disappointments, and emotional survival strategies. Every technique you try to manifest something new gets filtered through this outdated identity matrix, and so the output remains the same. You can say, "I am abundant," all day, but if the identity running your psyche is, "I am someone who never has enough," the vibration of that truth overrides every word. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer saw this trap long ago. He spoke of the will as the blind force behind all human striving, a relentless, unconscious current we're all caught in. And unless we wake up to the nature of this will, unless we see the program behind the curtain, it keeps spinning the same fate, dressed in different costumes. Your state of being is not an emotion. It is the accumulated momentum of your identity. An identity is not fixed. It is chosen, but that choice only becomes real when you see that you've been unconsciously choosing every day to remain the person who doesn't have what they want. Society feeds this amnesia. It glorifies struggle. It deifies effort. It rewards suffering like a badge of honor. You've been sold a myth that the harder you try, the more deserving you become. But the universe does not deal in merit. It responds to frequency. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." That sounds empowering until you realize what you've made of yourself was never fully conscious. The cultural hypnosis runs deep. You're taught to identify with your job, your trauma, your relationship status, your achievements, but not with your possibility. Not with the version of you who already exists in another stream of reality, already living what you now crave. This disconnection is the hidden root of all unmanifested desires. Not your effort, not your worth, not your timing. And until you dismantle that false identity, until you pierce the illusion and meet the self that was buried under the programming, you will keep looping in frustration, chasing realities your current self was never designed to hold. Viktor Frankl, a man who found meaning in a concentration camp, wrote that man's ultimate freedom lies in the space between stimulus and response. In that space lies our power to choose who we become. But most never find that space. They react from conditioning, from memory, from wounds, and so the state never changes. And if the state never changes, neither does the world. Every day becomes a variation of yesterday until something breaks, until something in you rebels, not against the world, but against the false version of you that the world has mirrored back for too long. That rebellion is coming, and when it does, your state will shift, not because you learned a better method, but because you finally remembered who you really are. And this is where the consequences begin to unfold. Not loud or dramatic at first, but subtle, like the slow turning of a tide that pulls your life in directions you never meant to go. When you live from a misaligned state, the world responds accordingly, not to punish you, but to reflect the distortion within. It shows up as resistance, confusion, repeated failures, relationships that mirror your deepest fears rather than your highest worth. The mind will rationalize these patterns, blame them on timing, luck, external factors. But the truth is far more confronting. Your life is an echo of your state. Neuroscience calls it predictive processing. Your brain isn't passively observing reality. It's constantly projecting a model of what it expects to see based on past experience. In other words, your current identity literally filters what information you notice, how you interpret it, and what choices you believe are available. So if you unconsciously expect lack, betrayal, or limitation, you will unknowingly steer your life to confirm those beliefs again and again. The cognitive bias at play here is confirmation bias. The mind seeks evidence to support what it already believes to be true, even if those beliefs are rooted in trauma or false assumptions. And culture only deepens the trap. You're praised for being realistic, for setting reasonable goals, for accepting what is. But what if what is just a product of your current state, not an objective truth? What if the world you think you see is just a mirror of your internal assumptions you never consciously chose? Most people never ask these questions. They adapt to their limitations. They shrink their dreams to fit the identity they inherited. And the tragedy is that they think this is maturity. They call it being grounded, humble, wise. But it's just submission in disguise. And as this unconscious submission compounds, it begins to rot the spirit from the inside. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes not from failure, but from the quiet knowing that you never even tried to live as your highest self because the version of you who could felt too foreign, too audacious, too dangerous to fully become. And so people settle, not because they lack ambition, but because they remain in a state that cannot hold expansion. The nervous system, too, plays a role. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. Every past rejection, every shame spiral, every failure is stored not just as memory, but as sensation. And so when you try to shift into a higher state, into love, abundance, confidence, your body may recoil, tense up, scream, unsafe, even though logically you want it. This is why state change feels hard, because the old identity is wired into your nervous system as familiar. And familiar always feels safer than free, until you become conscious, until you begin to choose safety in the unknown. Every breakthrough demands the death of an identity, and death, even symbolic, is terrifying to the ego. That fear isn't a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're at the edge of transformation. And most turn back at that edge, but some don't. Some press forward. Some allow the old self to burn. And what rises is not a better version of who they were, but someone entirely new. Someone the world can no longer ignore because their state commands a different reality. This isn't fantasy. It's physics. Consciousness, in its purest form, shapes the very fabric of experience. The timeline you live in is not fixed. It bends to the gravity of your state. So the cost of staying asleep to that truth is everything. Your joy, your potential, your freedom. That's the price of remaining in the unconscious state that matches your current life. The question is, how long will you keep paying it? There comes a moment in every awakening where the pain of staying the same outweighs the fear of change. When the weight of old identities, outdated beliefs, and inherited limitations becomes unbearable, and something deep within you cracks, not in despair, but in defiance. That moment is the beginning of the rebellion, not against the world, not even against others, but against the false version of yourself you've unknowingly protected for years. It's the moment you stop trying to improve the old self and instead choose to dissolve it, because no amount of polishing an illusion will ever turn it into truth. And once you see that, a radical shift becomes possible. This rebellion doesn't look like fire and fury. It often starts quietly, an inner resolve, a line drawn in the sand of your soul. You decide, maybe for the first time, to feel the discomfort of expansion, rather than the numbness of stagnation. You start to imagine, not as wishful thinking, but as a deliberate act of creation, the version of you who already lives in the state you desire. You speak differently, even if your voice shakes. You walk differently, even if the world hasn't yet mirrored the shift. You begin to act from the state, not for the state. This is the secret the world was never going to give you. You don't wait for your reality to confirm the change. You become the change. So reality has no choice but to respond. The world is not testing you. It's mirroring you. And the moment you stop begging it to shift, and start embodying the energy of one who already owns their power, the illusion collapses. Historical rebels of the inner world knew this. Think of mystics like Rumi, who spoke of burning the house of false self, or Nietzsche, who declared, "Become who you are." Not who you were told to be, not who society rewards, but who you truly are beneath the conditioning, the fear, the narrative of lack. This rebellion is internal alchemy. It requires courage, yes, but not the kind built on aggression. It's the courage to be still, to feel, to confront every voice that says you can't, and to answer, "I already am." And when you do this, something unexplainable begins to unfold. People treat you differently, not because they've changed, but because you have. Opportunities start appearing, not by coincidence, but because your field is now aligned with them. The effort becomes less about trying and more about receiving. And the force that once pushed you forward is replaced by a magnetic pull. That's not magic. It's resonance. You're no longer playing life from the outside in. You've flipped it. Your internal state has become the blueprint, and the world rearranges itself to match. You are no longer seeking the timeline. You're broadcasting it, and from this new vantage point, you see it clearly. You never had to fight for your desires. You only had to stop being the version of yourself that couldn't hold them, because once you shift into the state where it is done. And now, at the end of all striving, at the edge of every former illusion, you stand before the ultimate realization, the truth that collapses every false paradigm and reorders your entire existence. There is nothing to manifest because everything already exists. The universe is not something you manipulate. It's something you merge with. The life you desire, the love you crave, the peace you long for, they are not in the future. They are in a frequency, a timeline, a state of consciousness that you can enter at will, not by deserving, not by suffering, but by aligning. And that alignment isn't a task. It's a remembrance. You are not becoming. You are remembering the self that never lacked, never waited, never doubted. The moment you fully know that, not just in theory, but in the marrow of your being, reality begins to bow to your presence. Time bends, circumstances shift. The outer world, once a cage, becomes a canvas. And from that canvas, you no longer ask, will it happen? Instead, you live from the place where it already has. That is the ultimate power. Not to predict the future, but to embody it so deeply that the present cannot help but catch up. Every thought, every action, every breath becomes an echo of that certainty. This is not delusion. This is quantum identity. You are collapsing the wave function of potential into form by becoming the observer who knows it is done. Not hopes, not waits, knows. The old self, the seeker, the striver, dissolves in this knowing, and what remains is stillness, not stagnation, but a silence so full it vibrates with creation. You no longer chase. You attract, not because you've earned it, but because you've matched it. Your energy becomes sovereign. Your state becomes unshakable. And even when chaos swirls around you, you are unmoved because you now live from a center that was never touched by fear. You realize that every delay was mercy, every denial was redirection, and every moment of frustration was just life asking, will you finally become the one who has? And when you answer yes, not with words, but with embodiment, the gates open, the loop ends, the illusion cracks, and you step into a reality that had been waiting for you all along. Not a dream, not a fantasy, but your most natural state, fulfilled, aligned, inevitable, because when you are in the right state, it is done.